Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome to Q&A, the show where I take your questions and answer them here in video format. Ton of questions to get into it, so let's just jump into it, man. And we're going to start with the question from the master who says, what is Stefanski's job security looking like right now? I think it's fine right now. It's not amazing. Like, he's not ironclad. I think if the team finishes like 2 wins, 3 wins, like in that atrocious tier, then he might have his seat be a little hot. But we got to look at the big picture here when we're talking about if a coach is on the hot seat instead of just looking at the immediate and wanting to do the knee-jerk reaction. Kevin Stefanski is a 2-time coach of the year. Kevin Stefanski is probably the most respected head coach the Cleveland Browns have had since Bill Belichick. And the most decorated head coach they've had since Marty Schottenheimer. So firing that coach would probably take a sample of a couple of years of disappointment versus just one disappointing year. And when I say a couple of years in disappointment, let me be very clear here. I'm talking about years in a row. So if he has a disappointing 2025, like this is shaping up to be. Now, if the Browns go on a run here, win a bunch of games, all of a sudden this season doesn't feel like a disappointment anymore, right? Even though the record's lower than what we assumed it to be. See, every season's a journey, you know, my whole take on that thing. But if he has like a 3-win 2025 to pair with this season or something like that, then I think his seat will be beyond hot and then he could be fired. But right now he's coming off a coach of the year. He just signed an extension. He's pretty safe, and that probably extends to Andrew Berry. Now, that doesn't mean they don't have questions to answer or things that they need to improve in order to make sure they maintain their job security. And I really want to have a conversation one day about, like, when fans say a coach needs to be held accountable, what exactly does that mean? Because it just seems like people think being held accountable means you fire that person. And I don't think firing somebody is the best way to hold them accountable, because usually you want to hold somebody accountable because you want them to grow in whatever role that they're in. When we're talking about something with a job, right? We're not talking about the criminal justice system or something like that. We're talking about a coach who didn't win as many games as you wanted to win. So when you're talking about in that context, you want to hold somebody accountable. That doesn't mean fire them, though, right? Like, that means just figuring out what they need to be successful and what they personally failed at that they need to improve in order to be the coach that they want to be, and maintain the job security that they want to maintain. But right now, I mean, I think Kevin's going to probably win a few games down the stretch here. I think this team's still going to get to like 7-8 wins somehow. And if he does that, he'll be more than safe. The next question comes from Matthew, who says, if Dorsey does get canned, what offensive system or coach would be the best blend to modernize the Stefanski system? And what type of QB would we be looking for in the draft? I mean, these questions, answering that question is almost impossible right now, to be honest with you, right? We don't even know what quarterbacks are going to declare for the draft. We don't know what coaches may or may not be available at this point. So having a conversation about if Dorsey gets canned, who replaces him, that's kind of a waste of time, because we're just not at that point yet where that's going to be a conversation that can even be had, because who would we even be including in that conversation? I'll just be saying random names. What I can say is, if Dorsey gets canned, does that affect the Browns' will to draft a quarterback? I think it might, right? I don't think you want to go in and draft a quarterback in the same year that you're trying to figure out what your identity is offensively. That's just putting a lot of pressure on a young quarterback. So that might have an effect on things, or maybe you just revert back to the Kevin Stefanski stuff. And if that's the case, then you're probably not going to hire a big name. You're probably going to roll with one of the guys still on the roster, like Tommy Rees or somebody like that. The next question comes from Stevie, who says, hey, Q, I enjoy your podcast very much. What do you think the Browns' win-loss possibilities for the rest of the year could be? I am excited on some of the changes, especially bringing Wyatt back. Love the pod. Go Browns. Yeah, I think the Browns are gearing up to play some better football down the stretch. Now, we got to figure out who the quarterback's going to be for the rest of the year. But even if that's the case, I think this run game is going to be much better with a healthy Nick Chubb, especially once he gets acclimated back to playing shape. And then with Wyatt Teller coming back and the rest of the offensive line, not just getting healthy, but playing themselves back into healthy shape. Have to remember but Jack Conklin's missed over a year of football. He wasn't going to come back the first 2 weeks he came back and look amazing, right? Like same way we're giving Nick Chubb some leeway to get back healthy and get back to himself because he hasn't played in a while. It's the same kind of leeway you got to give to Jack Conklin, and even somebody you don't like Jed Wills, you probably got to give him that same leeway because it's like, hey, he's coming back after not playing for a while. It's not just going to snap back to him. It's probably going to take a couple of games here to get acclimated for them and everybody else coming back on the offensive line, especially the guys who had missed most of the offseason. So, yeah, I think once you get these guys acclimated, you get Nick Chubb acclimated, the run game's going to be better. That's going to help whoever is playing quarterback, whether it be JAMEIS, whether it be DTR. And then I think the defense has really got that ball rolling downhill the last few weeks. So hopefully that continues, and that could be a path to success for this team. I feel optimistic about it, but I'm not going to say it's going to happen or anything like that. Sarcastrophe says, with Chubb getting into the swing of things, do you think the Browns will just run Chubb into the ground to make up for lackluster QB and offensive line play? Browns have 4 running backs on the roster right now. Pierre Strong, Nick Chubb, Jerome Ford, who hopefully will come back from injury next week or at least closer to the bye week. And then they have Deontay Foreman. So they don't just have to run Nick Chubb. They're going to run all 4 of those running backs. They'll give Nick Chubb 15, sometimes 20 carries, depending on how well he's running. But they're probably not going to go more than that. And everybody else is going to get the carries that they get after that. So, no, I don't think this is a situation where you run Nick Chubb like 50 times or something like that. Like, you're not going to give him Adrian Peterson carry numbers because really wouldn't be worth it at this point. But yeah, I think you do run him, his normal amount. This question is from Alan, who says, have you seen Shelby Harris's take that the Browns fans have lost the players? As a lifelong fan who was upset that anybody cheered the injury, I'm mad that I'm getting lumped in with the ones who did, even though I spoke out against it. Did his statement anger you like it did me? I'm going to be honest. After that game, after the reaction to the reactions, I just did not find any good reason to really dig into any of those quotes, to be honest with you. The players were coming from a very emotional place, right? They were saying some shit that you would say because you're coming from an emotional place. Like Nick Chubb had come back, he got that fever pitch, and then Deshaun Watson tears his Achilles, you got that fever pitch. You don't have the greatest reaction to the tear. Like the fans don't have the greatest reaction to him tearing his Achilles. You have that, which brings up all your feelings about what the Deshaun Watson burden that you've been carrying through the last few years, and you have that. And then you look up and you realize you're 1-6 and you just lost to the Cincinnati Bengals for the first time at home. And for some of these guys, and for the first time in their entire career, they lost to the Bengals. So yeah, they were coming from an emotional place and they said some dumb shit. And, I'm just going to take the same route I take in my personal life. When somebody is clearly coming from an emotional place and they're clearly worked up and they're just so worked up that they're saying stuff to kind of get an effect or a reaction out of people, I usually just kind of ignore it and try my best not to take those kind of things personal, because I found in my life that reacting to that kind of stuff or giving that stuff like any kind of credence just kind of makes people double down on shit they don't even mean. Shelby Harris does not actually believe that the fans lost the players. The players are not going to spend a whole year mad at the fans. If they win 5 games in a row and they come back to a loud Cleveland Browns stadium, they're going to get over it really quickly, just as fast as the fans are going to get over all of this. This is temporary. What the fans are mad about and what the players are frustrated about are basically the same thing. They're not winning right now. If the team was winning, nobody would be bitching and moaning about any of this on any side of it. So if the team starts winning, ain't nobody going to have a problem. And if the team doesn't start winning, then it don't really matter if anybody has a problem, because if you got a problem, you probably just going to bounce. So I just have not seen the reason to get wrapped up in it, right? Like, this just feels like you can see people being messy, and I'm just not going to fall into the mess. Like, Shelby Harris says whatever he says, and, you know, if he gets 2 sacks next week, we'll love Shelby Harris again. It ain't that deep. We just want the team to win, and they just want to win at the end of the day. KJ says the Browns are 52-85-1 with Paul DePodesta as the chief strategy officer. What blackmail does he have on Jimmy to still have his job? Well, one, I just don't think that's how his job is judged. Like, some jobs aren't judged by the win-loss record. Honestly, most jobs in the NFL aren't judged by the win-loss record. The only 2 people in the building that really get judged harshly by their win-loss records are the head coach and the quarterback. Everybody else gets judged based on a specific set of guidelines that they were here to be brought in. I don't think DePodesta was here to turn around the Browns record initially. Like, he's the guy who wanted to make sure the Browns maximize their draft strategy. So of course they lost early. And then also you got to consider a lot of that win-loss record was built up when Jimmy Haslam wasn't even listening to DePodesta, right? Where he hired Hugh Jackson against the recommendation of DePodesta, and then went again and hired Freddie Kitchens against the recommendation of DePodesta. There's no blackmail that DePodesta has to keep his job. Jimmy is well aware of when he listened to DePodesta, what the team did when he started listening to DePodesta, and what the team was doing when they didn't listen to DePodesta. Right? Like, that's part of it. When they were listening to their chief strategy officer, whether you like this era or not, this has been the most successful the expansion Browns have ever been. When they were actively ignoring DePodesta, who they brought in to be a chief strategy officer, this team had its worst era of football that they ever had. So, like, that's why he has his job. He's a chief strategy officer. His job was to bring stability to the Cleveland Browns, and we got a head coach and GM on the second contract. He's been successful. I don't know why DePodesta has become the ire of so many people, and like, people want to fire him. But I don't think he's this boogeyman that some people are really trying to create right now. I think it's easy to make DePodesta a boogeyman because he's so away from the public that he's never going to defend himself. And he's also like mysterious. So you can just say anything that about DePodesta and like say that his responsibilities or whatever, and some people will believe it. But like, honestly, I don't know why DePodesta has become this boogeyman to a lot of people, or this lightning rod to a lot of people. He's just not that controversial, man. Like, he's just the chief strategy officer, and that's about as meaningful as a job right now as it sounds, because the Browns, like, he was brought in to bring stability. The Browns have a head coach and GM in their second contract. That's the most stability this franchise has ever seen. So, like, you gonna fire the dude? It don't really make sense to me. But I think the reason so many people want DePodesta fired is because nobody knows what DePodesta truly does on a day-to-day basis. And the reason nobody knows what DePodesta does on a day-to-day basis is because he's not really a part of the day-to-day operations of the Cleveland Browns. It's not his job. So that's why, like, it's Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski making the day-to-day decisions for the Cleveland Browns. And that means you have to accept it when they make decisions you don't like. and you accept it and you give them credit when they make decisions you do like. I do that fairly often. I have given Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski a lot of credit for decisions that I like, and I also give them credits for things that I don't like. I was on here saying, hey, not benching Deshaun Watson on them. A lot of people in this city would give them a pass for that. I'm not. Even if you like these dudes, you got to understand that these are the guys making the day-to-day decisions. It's not Jimmy. It's not Paul. It's not D. It's these two dudes. They're in charge of the team. They're in charge of football operations. So the decisions they make, whether you like them or not, they the ones making them. There's not secret like conspiracy going on. Like the whole Ken Dorsey play call thing, right? A lot of people are like, Jimmy made him do that. Where Jimmy ain't been in the building but like 3 weeks this season. People like Jimmy made him do it, but like all I know is when you look at the Browns facility, you don't see Jimmy Haslam in the building every day. It's a news when Jimmy Haslam is in the building. You do see Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry in the building. Same thing with Paul DePodesta. You never find out that he's in the building. The people making the decisions on football operations are those two. Like, it's not Paul DePodesta. Well, you think you're going to fire Paul DePodesta and like draft a different quarterback and sign a different offensive coordinator? That's not what he does. What do people think that Paul DePodesta does? I don't get it. It's just fascinating to me. All right. We got a question from Jerry who says, your opinion on the new rumor that the team is fed up with Winston. Some context, supposedly JAMEIS changed the play on the jet sweep to Tillman against the Eagles. It's the reason why he was demoted to third string. Yeah. I look, I can understand that was something that bugged him, because I remember watching and thinking, man, I think JAMEIS audibled out of that play and did like check to something else. But Kevin took credit for the play call in the press conference. So I was like, maybe I was wrong on that. But now this story drops. I'm like, okay, yeah, he definitely checked. Because you go back and tape, it looks like he checked to something. And yeah, I can understand that ticking people off. But if JAMEIS goes out there and throws for the most passing yards that we've had a quarterback throw for all season, then that small annoyance that they had about him in the Eagles game, well, it's just not going to be a thing anymore. Nobody's going to care about it. Like, it's only going to matter if JAMEIS goes out there and plays terrible. And if he plays terrible, then he ain't going to stay the starter, right? But if he goes out there and plays well, that's something that's so small that it's not really going to linger, right? Like, that's not a big deal. It's just something that kind of annoyed you. And, you just didn't want to do a QB sneak package with him because you didn't trust him to do the sneak there. But if he goes out and plays well, then you'll be fine. It's not nothing, but it's just such a small thing that it's not going to take much to change people's feelings on that. You know what I mean? The next question from Wolf says, the media trying to act like the Browns are in full-blown panic as it is clearly misinterpretation of what happened. They claim Coop was a part of this, but ignore even their own reports that before practice or the season that they weren't extending Coop and clearly moving on from it. They act like play calling is the problem when everybody knows that Kevin was what? They act like play calling is problems, even though everyone thought Kevin should give it up for like 2 seasons now. You had me until the end. I was really rocking with you to the end there. No, I don't think the Browns are in full-blown panic, but they're clearly not at peace right now. They're 1-6. Now, is some of this stuff kind of like becoming a victim of when it happened and like that's kind of guiding the narrative? Yes. Like the Amari Cooper trade's a perfect example. I think the Browns would have made that trade if they had a winning record. It would have pissed everybody off, but they would have made that trade if they had a winning record, especially if they had it in spite of Amari Cooper not playing well. But it kind of gets like reported on as like, oh, the Browns are tanking, they're having a fire sale, when they were probably going to be pretty open to moving Amari Cooper. Hence, they were open to trading Amari Cooper in the offseason for Brandon Ayuk. The play calling thing, I disagree with the math that you got there, but I do agree with the overall thought that it's a bit of an overblown narrative about the play calling. I think, there's some of it that has to do with wanting to see what Ken Dorsey can do. There's some of it that has to do, and I think most of it has to do with the procedural stuff, wanting to get rid of these procedural penalties that they're having consistently. And then some of it has to do with who's going to be playing quarterback and who fits that strength the best and who wants to work that. I think people are making a lot of assumptions about decisions being made and assuming why these decisions are being made and running with them at 100 miles per hour. And they're running face first into some bad conclusions, I would say. Provider says, hey, Q, wouldn't you much rather the Browns take a quarterback in 2026 versus 2025? I'm not going to get myself married on the year, right? Because you could draft a bad quarterback in 2025 just as easily as you could draft a bad quarterback in 2026 or 2027. The real question here is, will the Browns draft a quarterback that they love? If you're going to do it in the first round, you have to have an absolute belief that the quarterback that you're drafting is going to be a franchise quarterback. You can't sit here and tell me he's going to be like Geno Smith. You can't sit here and tell me he's going to be like Kirk Cousins. You have to have a reasonable belief that this dude is a franchise quarterback. Because whenever you lower the bar for a draft prospect, it's always a disappointment, right? Whenever it's a first round pick and you're like, hey man, he could be like Kirk Cousins. Maybe his floor is Kirk Cousins. Like whenever you're saying Kirk Cousins, Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, any of those middle tier quarterbacks, whenever you're talking about a draft prospect, it's a sign that quarterback is probably going to have a hard time living up to the hype. Like, look at the best quarterbacks right now. And like how many of them were comped to like Kirk Cousins of the ones that were drafted in the first round. I know somebody's going to throw Brock Purdy in there, but we're talking about first round picks, right? Like usually the quarterbacks who are drafted in the first round, those are the dudes we comp into like superstars. Because if you think a guy's a franchise quarterback, that usually means you should take him in the first round. But if you think he's anything less than that, don't take him in the first round. That's where I stand on it. I don't really care what year it is. If the Browns are convinced that Shedeur Sanders is a franchise quarterback, even if I don't agree, by all means, do it. Take it. Trust it. If they think Cam Ward is a franchise quarterback, if they think Curtis Wark is a franchise quarterback, if they think Jalen Milroe is a franchise quarterback, if they think it's going to be somebody in 2026, but the only thing I require is not the year that the player gets drafted, but the belief in that player who gets drafted that you're taking a franchise quarterback. Anything less than that, then I think you're setting yourself up for failure and wasting time. So that's what I require for me personally about drafting a quarterback, is that it can't be that you kind of like somebody and you want to draft them in the first round. Like my whole thing is, if you're not comfortable drafting a quarterback in the top 5, then you really should not consider drafting them at least in the top 30. Like maybe you could swing around and get them in like 31, 32. But if we're talking about quarterbacks, if you don't think that you would justify drafting that dude in the top 5, you probably don't believe in that quarterback enough for him to be a franchise guy. So that's where I'm at with it. The next question comes from P Money, who says, obviously there's a lot of negativity this year, but more on the positive note, who are some players who have been meeting or exceeding expectations? Denzel casually being the best corner in football isn't being talked about. That's a great point. Denzel Ward and JOK have been playing excellent football the last few weeks, and it has gone painfully under the radar. Denzel Ward, I think he had an absolute beauty of a game last week versus the Cincinnati Bengals. It's unfortunate that it didn't result in a win for him, but he's playing some great football. And yeah, it should be talked about more. Hopefully the Browns could win more. And, maybe with the Watson distraction being off the team now since he's injured, there's more room to talk more about Denzel Ward and to appreciate it now that the conversation isn't constantly Watson watch, basically. So we'll see. But yeah, I think you're right. You know, Denzel Ward, more people should talk about it. And, you know, there's just not that much interest in talking about Denzel Ward and how well he's playing. And, you know, I think that's a shame, but I also think that's a result of the Browns not winning that much this year. But I want to thank you guys for asking these questions. You guys have a great day. Oh, no. We got more. My bad. Time out. We got some extra questions here. I thought we were wrapping up. Oliver Kane says, as a content creator, how hard is it to separate the frustration from being a fan and being an impartial analyst? I know you do your utmost to be impartial regardless of the record, but how do you set your mind to do it this season? Love the show. Peace. Well, I don't look at it as being impartial. I am a Browns fan. I talk about that all the time. I like, if you're saying I'm biased, I'm a Browns fan. Yeah, that's true. Like, yeah, I'm looking at this through the lens of a Browns fan. But that doesn't mean I'm not fair, right? Me being a Browns fan does not really affect my ability to look at things fairly. And that's something that, like, sometimes people get mad at me for, because like sometimes it's time to go gung-ho all Browns super fan, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. Right? I want to be fair to the situation. And that's kind of the balance that I do. What allows me to maintain my fairness to the team, no matter what they're doing, positive or negative, is I just love football. And at the end of the day, I'm talking about the football, and you can't lie about the ball. You know, the tape is there. You got to talk about the ball, and you got to talk about what's going wrong with the football and what's going right with the football. It's more about, to me, being fair. I don't look at everything, and I think this is a trap that a lot of people fall into. If you try to look at everything and think to yourself actively, how can I be impartial? Well, you're creating a bias by being impartial, because who knows if you're trying to like split the middle between two things that aren't equal. I'm looking at this. I'm a Browns fan. I want the Browns to win, but I'm also going to be fair and honest about what I am seeing, because I want to have these conversations about football. I think that's the best way to kind of describe it. But that's it. That's the last question. I saw that question pop out. I could not skip it. I wanted to talk about that one. So thank you for that question, Oliver Kane. But thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.